All right. Okay, we're good to go. So go ahead, Mark or Jim, with the presentation, and we'll have questions afterwards. Just a reminder, if any of you do have questions, everybody is muted except for the presenters. Feel free to use the chat window for any questions along the way. Jim?
And you will moderate those questions, Kate, or?
Yes, I will do that.
Okay. Okay.
Great.
Good morning. Well, good day. Let's say good day. Yes. My name is Marc Lyonnais. I'm based out of Canada this morning, and it's a balmy 10 degrees. I'm going to have a flash freeze to go to -24. At -24, you really don't care if it's Fahrenheit or Celsius. It's cold. And but let me start today by talking to you about the architecture. And I have as well with me my colleague, Jim Stewart. Jim, would you like to say a few words?
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, sure. I'd love to. I've been working with Mark. I think we got acquainted back in 2011 when supercomputing was going to Seattle, and we've been working together ever since. And it was fun to be on the architecture team this year, to follow Mark's lead and to enjoy the process of trying to figure out how to put all of these vendors and projects and people together. And so we had a few ideas. It was very successful, and I look forward to spending this time with you. Thanks, Mark.
Yes. Talking about time, this is a fairly short presentation. Normally, Jim and I like to present in form of a discussion. So it is, we expect you guys to participate, have questions. Feel free to ask any type of question, whether they're related or not to architecture. Depending how complex they get or simple they get, we can address them. There will not necessarily be a period of question at the end. I'd rather have questions while we're going, and we can proceed this way. If everybody's okay with that, I guess I'll start. I'll do the slide presentation, and I'll pause at all slides to see if there's any question, or Jim, or any comments you want to add on, and so it begins.
Great.
So, without further ado, this is the architecture. It's pretty complex and simple at the same time. At the top, you see the providers that they, in order to get supercomputing, we need to have an external connection to the outside world. And those connections were basically connected many sites in the United States. And I see there is some chats. Okay.
I'm monitoring it, Mark, so if there's anything that comes up for you, I'll let you know.
Oh, okay. I'm just going to shut that thing. So from the outside world, we had CenturyLink who connected most of the United States sites, some of SCinet, some of Florida, Empath, mainly Starlight. Some of it was Caltech, some of it was from SCinet. There was an uplink from Ethernet. When we do supercomputing, we try to be dual source in terms of internet provider at the minimum. So it's not a big deal if one provider, if one fiber is being cut, we always can revert to another provider. Of course,
Mark, can I jump in and just make a comment here? So CenturyLink for the last 4 or so years has been providing the bulk of our circuits, and the way that we've decided how to put these circuits out is we tend to go to the same places, but we also ask for additional circuits. So just to give you a point of reference here, we had about 3,600 gig circuits this year. 30 or so of those were provided by CenturyLink, and there were actually requests for almost 40, but we just really question ourselves, and we did cut out a few circuits, not a lot, but a few. Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, and just to continue my thought, obviously Internet 2 and ESNet are connecting the service that I'm assuming you would be more aware of. and then we had some a new service provider, well, a newer service provider, if you will, called Zayo. They've offered to connect some private waves from Washington up into Pacific Wave. As well, they did give us some internet uplinks from Front Range Gigapop. They did the MUX as well. And there was also, you'll see a red line coming from the Front Range Gigapop, which is actually the top right corner. You see a red line. This was a DWDM, if you will, alien wavelength that we tried on the Ciena 6500. It was basically connecting a Juniper router with, I can't remember what were the optics, but they were DWDM 100 gig optics, and we proved that basically they were working. And so all in all, we pretty much had 3.6 terabytes in live into the show floor. One thing that I would like to say is capacity was high from a connectivity point of view. It's just simply that 100 gig is the realm of exchange, if you will. It's the unit base. We rarely now will route a 10 gig into supercomputing unless it's local. Most of it is done through transport gear, and they're all based on 100 gig multiple, if you will. And then what we did, we chose a four router, if you will, configuration from the routing team. They wanted to have multiple MPLS border router interconnect through the Juniper, the Arista, the Cisco router, and the Extreme router. Turns out that most of the job was done by the Juniper and the Arista, whereas the Cisco and the Extreme router, they were, if you will, given a second role based on the density of the equipment that was provided. One thing that always happen at supercomputing is there's last minute change. Those last minute changes sometimes are either surprises that would be kind of equipment that doesn't make it, or since it's bleeding edge for some of the vendor bleeding edge technology, sometimes the equipment is simply not available as per the plan, and they ship us a substitute. And that's pretty much what's happening with Cisco and Extreme. They shipped us the equipment that was not necessarily the planned one, so we juggled it a bit and we introduced them into the network and to make it so. You will also see around some taps here on the, I don't know if you can see my cursor.
Yeah, so you can see it pretty good, Mark.
Yeah, so you've got some cursors, a little bit that says G for Gigamon. They're all basically aggregating some, all the 100 gig that had a potentially IP routed internet onto them, and they were funneled, if you will, through our security setup, if you will, that was aggregating to the Gigamon equipment, and where we used Cloud Lab to host most of the virtual machines that were doing the analytics and the deep search. Maybe I could zoom in a little bit later, but you can see here that there were some very specific application. And by the way, those slides will be available if you need them. I can put them in the PDF, send them to Kate, and if you want them, it's not a problem at all. This diagram is registered into the LBNL library. I can't recall the number, but we can make that available. So if you want to make a paper and refer to it, because you were part of SC or doing some work on the SC, you can always do that.
Mark, are you going to comment on how this document was developed? And because Mark did 95% of the work on this, and it's quite a process, even though we're not here to really talk about the documentation itself. It's quite a process. And it does represent the overall, so you can see at the top the WAN, the center of the LAN, and the core of what goes on. Towards the bottom and left are all the DNOCs, or the distributed access points. And Mark was even able to show it that you see at the very bottom, and it's hard to see the detail, but those black little vertical lines are really just representation all the way out to the booths. And then you have the security section here. And Mark put this together, and just to be able to make this look good is quite an effort, and hundreds of hours. Represents hundreds of hours of Mark's time and others that helped with that.
Yeah, well, my background is a hardware designer. So when we had to, well, first of all, decide what we were interconnecting the network together, and the devices and network elements were chosen. Then we started to represent that onto the drawing that you're seeing. And as you can see, I don't know if you ever saw a PCB design, but it does look like a PCB design. And the idea was to minimize the number of line crossing, if you will, and to maximize the capability of anybody to trace any signal on the diagram. Obviously, I was not alone that did that. I had some help. Gonzalo Rodrigo and Julian Hammer did some of the drawing aids, if you will. But in a nutshell, the idea was to allow this network map, if you will, to be compatible with InMon, which means that each of the different line that you see, whether it was a 100 gig line, 100 gig OTN, or a terabit construct, and I'll get to the terabit construct a little bit later on, down to the booth connection, you could see which one was being used at how much percentage, because we had some color coding into it. And I don't necessarily have a live demo on that, but we can always organize some movie that was going on and get back to you if you want to. And then that was part of the work that was really done. I'm just going to continue the description of the map. If you go a little down, you see there's a fundamental choice that we made. We could have gotten lazy and got all the 100 gig E's out of the routers directly to the booth. Actually, that's what we used to do. And out of this simplification of the network, we figured out that through the current fiber plant, there was a lot of misconnection. There was a lot of bit errors on the Ethernet frame. And as you know, if there's one SDS error on the packet, between a router and another device on the Ethernet, you just drop the packet, and that's not necessarily very good for service. So what we did introduce over the last 2 years was an OTN infrastructure, and this is why you're seeing a lot of the orange, if you will, and purple interconnection that connects the bulk of the network, which is the NOC here, to each and different DNOC. We call them DNOC for distribution NOC, and these were 2 booths. And the really cool thing here is by using the forward error correction inside the OTN, we pretty much solve the optical signal to noise ratio limit, if you will, that was impacting the optical budget between the NOC and the booth. We only had 2 or 3 dBs. And those 2 or 3 dBs can run out really fast when you interconnect all the fibers through using fiber patch panels. So instead, what we did is we introduced what we would call a metro and a data center interconnect architecture in there, which is where you see those transport providers, Ciena, Cisco, Adva, Infinera, Juniper, that basically their BTI acquisition, and Nokia. And what we did there is we asked the vendors to give us an opportunity to look at their metro portfolio in their data center interconnect, which we call DCI. And that allowed us to, as you can see here, for either the Wave server or the Nokia here, to aggregate tens of 100 gigs into a single terabit capable fiber. That was done through multiple DWDM signal. Most of the time, there were 5 times 200 gig per signal, 200 gigabits per second signal, which was using quad phase shift keying type of modulation. And if you have any questions, just let me know. We can always get down to the basic on that. That allowed us to create an interconnection between most of the booth, most of the DNOCs. And that was really critical. One of the things that the booths, our customers, basically the booth, they're asking us sometimes to interconnect 2 booths together. And we give them 2 choice. We can give them a dark fiber, which is totally passive, and they power them with their own optics. Or we give them what we would call the managed service, which is simply you putting an OTN transparent fabric that simply does the good old optical transport networking that adds a time domain multiplexing layer. It doesn't do any switching, but it does add from the protocol of OTN some forward error correction that actually gives you this extra margin that you're looking for when you want to have a high bit error rate transferred with actually no errors. I'm going to pause to see if there is any questions so far.
Nothing's in the chat window so far, Mark. So
okay,
I think we're okay. If something comes up, I'll jump in. But maybe I could just mention a couple things here. As you look at this, you can see that this is very intense in equipment, and we rely on our vendors to provide a lot of equipment for us. And at times, we get the production equipment that everybody knows and people are familiar with. We see that in the Junipers and the Aristas and the big green boxes. Those are generally things that we know quite a bit about. But what has happened, especially over the last couple of years, where we've gotten into this DCI and OTN equipment on the floor, and we've gotten some pre-production equipment that's been given to us, and that presents some problems because the volunteers don't always know how to work with that equipment. And if it's Ciena equipment, we've got Mark and we've got that they do a really nice job of providing staff there that really understand, but we don't always get the help from the vendors that we need, but they're trying to show off their equipment and what they're doing, and we want that pre-production equipment. So there's always this challenge of how do we show off their equipment, how do we bring it up, make it work, get the most out of it. This network is a lot production, but there are things in here that you can see, and Mark can really address them where we struggled a little bit because the vendors, we had to get them up to speed in what we're doing, and they had to do the support of this equipment. And so it's an interesting challenge, but we're trying to show off what the vendors can do. And we did some things, and I think Mark's going to talk about what we did with the data transfer node within SCinet this year and as we get into this. But there are some areas in here that are really go beyond just the standard production and just putting together a giant network that get into the kind of the cooler aspects of and the leading edge. And that's what the challenge is, and that's what Mark is really good at doing, is challenging the SCinet folks to think about not just how do we do 10 gig and 100 gig circuits, but how do we push to NFVs and the white boxes and data transfer nodes and OTN and DCI. And these are all things that Mark has brought to the mix the last couple of years, and I'm happy to help him with, and that I've enjoyed being involved with.
Thank you, Jim. I'm going to finish the description of this slide by describing what's going on the right side of the slide when you see this big conference Juniper router here. This is totally the support of the global internet. When you go to supercomputing, you have your device, your wireless devices, your Linden devices. You go to workshops, you go to all throughout the exhibit floor and the conference center. And there's a wireless infrastructure and there's a wired infrastructure to support Ethernet interconnect, in order to allow everybody to get their Ethernet access. This is done through what we would call an off-site from an exhibition floor point of view. It is still at the conference center, but it's in a different room. The reason is this internet provides access to not only the exhibition floor, but also the rest of the infrastructure, which goes beyond the calendar of the exhibit. So this infrastructure that you see, as well as the security, are what we would call the general conference support, and they allow us to, first of all, make sure that the security is maintained in terms of network integrity and hacking and so on. And at the same time, it allows us to, while we're dismantling the exhibition floor, because the exhibit is over and we're wrapping the activity up, there's still some, if you will, some workshops going on, some presentation going on the day after and so on. So we leave this equipment on a different room, and it is interconnected through the internet, through the front range gigapop. And this is why you're seeing those two green lines here, not necessarily going through any other equipment. These are really connected from those three providers directly into the conference router, and we then return this internet, if you will, with this 100 gig uplink, among other things. There's another one as well here, and this is how we redistribute to the exhibition floor. Since it's just 30 gig of internet, we can swing it back with 100 gig uplink, no problem. But in a nutshell, this is what I wanted to talk about on the first slide. Any question, or Jim, any comment? Take that as a no.
Yep, I think I'm good to move on. Go ahead, Kate.
So what did we do new in 2016 that we didn't do before? Well, first of all, we generated an automatic analysis. So goes back to most of the work that was done by Julian Hammer, a student, graduate student of University of, he's in Germany, so I can't recall which.
Nuremberg, wasn't he?
Yeah, maybe. And basically, he was very clever in terms of adapting the programmability, if you will, the design of this diagram, which is done in OmniGraffle. We were able to export it in a graphical way, kind of a vectors way, where we could redefine the vectors. So InMon, which is the software we're using to show weather map of the connection, was able to follow the signals that were all, if you will, characterized and described in each of the database, because in the end, the diagrams that you're seeing was also a reflection of the database. It's just not just an artwork. It also is being used for everybody to make sure that the interconnect, when it's time to debug, that the document is really accurate. We did a lot of validation checks, again, to find the database entry. Before they were manual, now they were actually done with a script. Always fun to think about that in 2017, having 3.4 terabits, we don't need to do it by hand. It's kind of useful. And so it increased the accuracy of the driving and the database. And for the first time this year, we've allowed the network diagram to be held or in control by three people, myself, Gonzalo Rodrigo, and Julian. And by doing so, we had three pairs of eyes looking at the diagram amongst the rest of the audit for the rest of the team as well. Then that was able to allow us to standardize and had a much better idea And you know, when you're doing a diagram like this, you develop kind of a tunnel vision, and you don't necessarily see how you could improve. And by having 3 sets of eyes, that really worked really well in our way. And I'm going to move on to the next slide, which is
can I tell a quick little story, Mark?
Yes, you want to tell the story, do you?
You know the story I'm going to tell, probably.
Yes,
It's kind of a fun exchange on email between Julian and Mark, where Julian sent an email that said, "Hey, I think I can automate some of this stuff," and Mark says, "Go ahead." And then a little while later, Julian said, "Here it is. Tell me what you think." Mark sends back an email, says it doesn't look any different, and Julian sends an email that says that's the point, and so. He just found a way to just import that information and make it automated. And Mark's response to that was, "Okay, carry on."
Yeah. He was really good. He was really clever. So
yeah,
we really implemented 4 new things in SCinet in 2017. Obviously, we tried to get better. We introduced new technology for exploration and qualification. And sometimes it's a multi-year process, and sometimes it isn't. And what we're trying to do here is to always improve, first of all, well, to explore the new technology. That's one of the first goals we were trying to have. Also to explore the how we could improve our way to collaborate with the research community, so we can actually get better at observing our customers that are the booth and the researchers that are attending the exhibition floor at SCinet. And how can we help out the SCinet staff, which some of them are your colleagues, to become better at what they do in terms of a job. We try to strive into thinking, and that's the vision we have, that those who attend and participate in SCinet have a high-end experience in the latest and greatest technology and in the latest and greatest design techniques or monitoring techniques or networking techniques in terms of telecommunications. So when they go back at their home institution, their knowledge is augmented, and they have not only more knowledge in terms of people they need, but also a new technology awareness of it. So we're trying to either qualify as, if you will, a certificate or a master degree cash, that it would be accelerated. And most of the people that are going there, they come back to us and say, well, it was really worth it. Now, how do we make it relevant? This year, we've introduced a 4x100 gig data transfer node. We've also, and I'll talk about all those 4 bullets in different slides, so don't worry about it if you don't necessarily get what I'm getting at right now. We did a security DDoS mitigation and some network hardware virtualization technology evaluation with what we would call the Corsa probe. I have a slide on that. We did some software control optical modulation service definition. So that, I don't know if you guys heard about, it's kind of a concept where you can, if you will, control the modulation of the optical carrier so you can have less or more bandwidth. And by doing so, we're exploring how we could steer traffic by adding or removing capacity on the link through, if you will, a software-defined controller, for lack of a better term. And we tried looking at that. So we were doing that on a piece of equipment, and I'll elaborate on that as well. We also continued a different implementation of data center interconnect and OTN implementation into the service definition of SCinet. So the implementation of OTN whether it was to a metro ring or a point-to-point data center interconnect, was a technology we explored in 2016. And in 2017, our job was to say, okay, we qualify the technology, it's relevant for SCinet, it helps us do the work. How do we now integrate it into the everyday's work that we're gonna implement through the database, through the service definition, and so on. So we did a lot of work onto this. I'm gonna pause, see if I had any questions.
No more questions, or no questions yet. But Marc, if I could just give a little overview on how I see this. And Marc mentioned about how we're trying to give the volunteers these experiences, and from just maybe just a level up looking at this, the way that we see this is that there's this production network, and so there's really maybe 4 or maybe 5 different areas where volunteers, as they get involved in this, benefit. One is that, and volunteers are on different levels at times, and so they're not all senior people. A lot of senior people there, but they get experience in production networks, and that's part of it. They also get experience with project management, and we're putting more and more. This is a huge project management puzzle to put together all of what we do here. Then there's relationships that they get to build. And last of all, there are these new things that they get to look at. And in fact, this has become more and more important to us. And as we have these needs to provide these 100 gig, 10 gig, even 1 gig connections to the booths, and the participants really rely on those to be production level, 24/7. The show is really short, and so it needs to be up and working. But we also have to have these opportunities to look at new things and to take some risk and to experiment. And so we've been doing that, and we've tried different iterations of that. But Jason has actually put into, and Jason Zarowski is the chair for 18 in Dallas, and he's worked with Marc and me, and Marc is leading, and we've got a new team this year that we're calling Experiments or something along those lines. And Marc is heading that, and Jason and I will be working with Marc in this area. But we think it's important to not just have this production and not build the relationships. Those are important things to do, but along with that, it's very important to try these new things. And that's really part of our challenge, is to make sure that we're doing interesting and new things each year.
Thank you, Jim. All right, next slide. That's the DPN experimentation. So I will assume that most of you know what the data transfer node is. It is actually well documented on your own institution. If you go on esnet.net and look for DPN, you'll know what it is. What we decide to do in collaboration with Jim Chen, Fayet, and Gonzalo Rodrigo, and Eric Puyol as well from ES that worked on this, is we had some projects where we had some data intensive service where we wanted to interconnect a single piece of hardware through multiple 100 gig DPMs. So this is why it was a 4x100 NIC card, if you will. And then the project was, how can we, first of all, interconnect the whole thing and make it work at the right line rate. And the second of all was, and this is what we're going to continue in 18, sorry. Don't want to get myself ahead too much. Is how do we book those systems? How do we make that permanent infrastructure or semi-permanent infrastructure? We had a lot of projects going on, about 10 projects that were connecting about 12 DPMs around the world at 100 gigs, and it went really well. We had a success story as well from a booth that their DPM didn't work, and they were able to use SCinet DPM and not lost, if you will, the time spent at the exhibit to do their experiments by booking some time on the SCinet 100 gig 4x100 BTN. It was a bookable service. We wanted to explore how we could not necessarily make that revenue generating service, but at least a service that researcher could use. Not all the researchers that are coming to supercomputing have those appliances at their home institution or have access to those. So we wanted to make SCinet a special place for it, and that's how we did it. It was a very good experiment. We are going to continue this experiment next year in the experimental network team that I'm leading, and it was great. Basically, everything went our way, if you will, in terms of getting the interconnection. It was really difficult to get that equipment. It's a new reality for us. Sometimes to deal with virtual equipment, virtual software entities. How do we define a vendor when it's just a software vendor, so it's totally virtual? How do we compare that with a piece of equipment that's tangible? So we had to go through these exercises, and that was really interesting. Any comment, Jim?
Nope, I'm good for now.
The second real big experiment was what we called it the Corsa experiment, the NRE experiment. We have the Network Research Exhibit group, which is a sister group of the experimental network, and what their job is. SCinet do their own experiments, and we submit them as a Network Research Exhibit. And the Network Exhibit, the Research Exhibit, is an outreach exercise to go see the vendors, researcher out there that want to, if you will, showcase their exercise, their experiments. The best one can be nominated to go to in this workshop, which is an innovation in network and I can't remember what's the acronym. Do you remember, Jim?
I can look it up. I can't remember off the top of my head.
So basically, the workshop is a top demonstration of the NRE, and they get published in the publication of Supercomputing, so it counts as an academic publication. So in that really interesting probing mechanism, there was a lot of experiments going on, and it's really it was depicted as a DDoS mitigation mechanism, but it was more powerful than that. The Corsa in red here was in line, obviously, with the, I think we were monitoring an ESNet link here. And it really was, it's a probe. It basically what it is, it's a transparent probe that allows you to trigger on whatever you want. And what was really cool about it at the beginning, that probe was looking for DDoS mitigation, and that's what the vendor Corsa wanted to do. But there was an experiment with ESNet that there was, I don't necessarily remember the nature of the experiment, but what was really cool about it is it was supposed to always send 2 packets of a very specific pattern. And the Corsa switch, which was at 100 gig, was able to show that these packets was actually, that were planned to be sent, were actually working. And that was a big thing for the experiment of ESNet. I see there are some comments, so I'm going to pause.
I think Kate's just put up that said it's the...
I just put the link for the Indus workshop.
Yeah, innovating the network for data-intensive science.
Oh, okay. Good. So what was really, that was really cool. And to me, that's a success story where there's a vendor. Corsa is a small vendor. It's a private. It's still a private company that is living on. These are colleagues of ours in the ex-Nortel, so they're in Ottawa, so I know them. But they are in a situation where they're under venture capital to their startup. They have some bright ideas, and they came in to do a demonstration with a piece of equipment. And they collaborated with the community to demonstrate a capability that they thought of, and they came back with a new novel way of using their network their network appliance, if you will, that they haven't thought of. So it really was a very fruitful experience for Corsa and for us in terms of finance. We are looking to continue this experiment from a security point of view, and to allow Corsa and the rest of the experimental team to think out loud, become a little bit more creative, build a more elaborate, if you will, ecosystem of virtual machines around it, so it becomes really a better appliance for us to understand. This device cannot be purchased if no one understands it. This device is useless if no one knows how to use it. And we think by putting it into test, into SCinet, we're doing a favor to the community more than to the company. Because the company, yes, it's a for-profit for a company. We all want to have a job at the end and pay the rent. But I guess in this time of network evolution and network transformation, it is also the time to give a chance to all those ideas to be exercised by an open mind, if you will. And that's what we were doing with this exercise.
So, Marc, I just wanted to jump in here and say that, the data transfer node, OTN, DCI, the Corsa with the experiments and the proofing that we've done there, there's kind of two sides to SCinet. One is NRE, and then the other this year is the experiments that are really looking at these forward thinking and new technologies and new ways of doing things. And the way I look at it is NRE is taking network the way it is right now, not really changing that up, not putting new elements in, but then layering on top applications, demonstrations, ideas that really show off what people are doing on existing networks. And there's a big need for that, and lots going on in that space. But then there's this idea of you put in these new pieces of equipment, you try these, you change the network up, and that really is the idea behind experiments, is that we're not just looking for what that application layer, but we're looking at what new elements do we put into the network, how do we change that, what are the new things that we bring along. I know I took a little bit of criticism at SC17. People walked in and said, oh, you just got all these 100 gig circuits, is that all you're doing? Well, we have to do that. That's part of what we do. But we also are looking to do these other more interesting things. And then there's got to be that balance between the two.
Yep. The last experiment, we call that the Harvey, Linden, and Joe setup. The reason why I'm taking this slide, this is part of the mission that SCinet decided to take when I joined in as the architect in 2016. Was to really open up a dialogue that was throughout the year, not necessarily 2-3 months before the show. And that was a recurring call every 2 weeks that our NRE team and the architecture team, and sometimes the WAN team, and sometimes the management team was going in and answering questions, clarifying some issues, and so on. But and that became a very fruitful exercise, because once you have a dialogue with your end user, you actually understand really better what they need, And like this, you can do a better customization or a better adaptation, if any, to their service.
Well, Mark, there's just not time to do customization if all you did was just right before the show and during the show.
Yeah.
So, you know, that's the idea of having this continuity came out of some discussions after 2015 and some things that just manifest themselves that we needed to have more long-range planning. And that's when we met at Starlight, we talked to Joe, and I think Harvey was there. I know that others were there. But when we started to look at this, and in our mind, maybe it should be a little different, but at least in our mind, there's this 36-month window that we're looking out. And so we're not, as SCinet, always working during that 36 months, but we are looking at doing the planning and having those discussions, and then letting these people, the Joes and the Harveys and these other researchers of the world, inform us, and then work together and do a lot more planning, so that when we do get to the show and we get to those weeks leading up to the show, we can be a lot more effective, and those researchers can get more done, more out of the show.
Yes.
Go ahead, Mark. Thanks for letting me butt in.
I'm going to point out two things here. There's a terabit ring when you think about it. There's a DCI here between Infinera, between the NOC and the Starlight booth with a terabit. There's interconnection between the two booths here, which is a terabit. There's another interconnection here with the wave server between Caltech booth and SCinet booth. And that created what we call a terabit ring. And the idea that Linden and Linden Mercer from Naval Research Lab was, what he wanted to do was to fool around with this capability that the wave server had through RESTful API to change the modulation at will. And by changing the modulation from QPSK to 8 QAM to 16 QAM, you could actually add or remove bandwidth onto the network, and enabling and disabling some 100 gig ports. And in order to do that, what they did is they had a link through the Coria and enable or disable by the open control wave system, which basically consisted of modulation change on that system. That allowed, and that caused SCinet to react to create a connection, which was link aggregation basically, that was able to understand when the extra capacity could actually be funneled from the NOC through the Caltech booth into Starlight. And if it was not enabled, it was actually going directly through the Infinera DCI. And that, just that small phenomenon is impossible to do if you're not at SC. I mean, there's not enough traffic, there's not enough appliances to do that in real life. It takes forever to do that. Us, with the preparation, within a week, it was set up, done, and proven. So this was one of the success stories that I'm really proud of, simply because we, one of the SCinet mission is to, and I think this is how I understood SCinet when I first joined in 9 years ago, is the objective of SCinet is to help accelerate research by providing a once in a lifetime, a once per year, very high-end network that allows the researcher to interconnect, and through those virtual long distance, people can walk the hundreds of feet between the booths and actually fine-tune everything to make it work and accelerate collaboration. So this is the thing that I'm really proud of, allowing the community to do that. And that was the final innovation that I wanted to discuss today from an SC17 point of view. And if you have any question, more than happy to take any comments, more than take. Jim, if you have any comments, please do so. I'm pretty much done.
A couple more things I wanted to mention is that it's interesting to see what happens in the creativity that happens during the show, because as things got going this year, a couple of the students, and remember these are students that are closing in on their PhDs, so they're brilliant people. But a couple of them decided that they were going to try and do different things. One of them did a heat map just showing where all of the data was flowing to and from on the floor, and the other one did a map that showed every booth and where it was going to in the world. And so they took this block diagram of all the booths and started showing all of the traffic flowing in and out of each one of those booths and where it was flowing to within the world. And that none of that was planned. All of that just took place during the show. And there are other things that happened. Mark mentioned one where they were trying to get some things done on a VPN. They couldn't, and they used the DTN that was available. So not everything can be planned out. Not everything can be controlled and figured out going into it. But having this network there and getting a lot of brilliant people together, they can do a lot of cool things, and a lot happens. So not everything can be orchestrated in what we do. Mark, a rebuttal?
On this, I guess, this is it. I guess, thank you for your time. Unless we have any questions, Kate, any?
Yeah, I was just going to thank you both for all of that information. And again, if anybody has questions, feel free to type it into chat. It's a lot of information. Obviously, all the work that went into it is evident here. Just wanted to ask if you have any, if you could give an example. There are always issues, as Jim just said, things can't always be planned, but any interesting issues or things that, you guys ran into in the preparation of the architecture, or, once we got there, as you said, that different equipment showed up based on inventory from different vendors, things like that. But anything interesting that you could share with all of us that you kind of solved on the fly that would be interesting to the group?
Yes. When we interconnected the DTN, it didn't work. This DTN guy here, the Juniper didn't like the free space optics, not the free space optics, the active cable that the vendor was providing. So we tried SR4, didn't work. So in the end, tried that cable, didn't work. We went back to SR4 cables with the plugs that I had from Ciena, and it ended up working. So it's always like this. It's always a situation where on paper it works really well, but when it's time to interconnect those devices together, there's so many things that goes wrong. The cabling is our worst nightmare. You see, the infrastructure is designed to have single mode fiber, so everything is based on LR4. And next thing you know, well, no one can afford, from a research point of view, an LR4 QSFP that's 25 grand. They'd rather actually go buy a $3,000 SR4 connection with a $40 fiber. So we always challenge us, SCinet, which is always working from a borrowed set of level of equipment, to actually go back to reality where people actually have to buy their piece of equipment, and they always do what they can with the most of their money. And sometimes it's the cheapest type of optics they can find on the market. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So there's a lot of work and a lot of time invested in understanding those different interconnect issues that we have.
Thanks, Mark. We've got one question from Roy. He asks, what was used to validate the network map against the SCinet database?
Oh, I wish I had Julian here. He had a script. So here's how he did it. We the database output, we had to give a name to each link, and each link had to point out whether they were going to a router port or a VLAN. And Julian and Gonzalo, what they did is they wrote a script that was actually reflecting that. And we can always go back. I can actually go ask them to show, but it was literally a script that was counting the number of lines and counting the number of ports and making sure everything was connected properly. And with the in-mod, what we were able to do is they were able to be validated as well after that when we put the test set. So we had a script to validate it, and we had a visual aid after that when we threw traffic on the system using the test set.
Thanks, Mark. If you have any follow-ups, Roy, feel free to post them. We're almost out of time, but if anybody else has any questions, feel free to ask. Anything else that, and just one point of clarification, actually, I think you just said this, Mark or Jim, was that the vendors, they actually loan this equipment to SCinet for the year. And maybe you could just real briefly in the last minute and a half, explain what the benefit for the vendors is, right? Other than their stuff is on this fancy stage, but what else?
Well, I think there's several things that help, and Mark's a vendor, so he could actually answer this. But I wanted to jump in because we've been doing a lot with the vendor relations, and I've talked to a lot of these vendors. It gives them the opportunity to bring their equipment, to have it looked at by people that are by these volunteers and by attendees, and it gets it in this mesh with all this other equipment. They couldn't prove this out. I think it was Juniper that was really excited this year because they were going to take that alien wave and they were going to move it from Cheyenne across the ADVA equipment to downtown Denver, and they'd actually wanted to move it from downtown Denver to the show floor through Ciena, but they didn't coordinate in advance. But they were super excited to be there and be able to prove that out. And so,
yeah, we do a lot of things that are illegals in the network that we still make it go, and we learn from it, right?
Yeah, they learn things about their equipment, and people show up and they get business from being there on the show floor also. So there's a lot of things that happen, and one of the things that's probably the most fun about what we do is we work with multiple vendors. They're all on the team together and they help each other. And even though they're natural competitors, they're still all good people, and it's fun to work together, and they help each other. And at the end of the day, it's a great experience that way. And that's why they're willing to donate the equipment and the time of some of their brightest people that are part of their companies too.
Thanks, Jim.
Mark, you want to add anything else on that?
For the purpose of the time, I will agree and say thank you, everybody.
All right.
Yeah, right at 1 o'clock. Thanks, Kate. It was a great opportunity.
Thanks very much to both of you, and thanks to everyone for joining. We are at the top of the hour, so the recording, I'll go ahead and stop that in just a minute, and it will be uploaded to the same folder with the rest of the recordings. Any questions or comments or follow-up information, feel free to send it to Jason or to the list or to myself, Kate at esnet.net or es.net, and we'll pass it along to Jim and Mark. But again, thanks everybody for your time, and enjoy your weekend.
Thank you.
Great. Yeah, thank you.
Bye.
Bye.